In a recent video, I mentioned that it's important to remember that the coronavirus pandemic is in fact not about any one political leader or any one country's election. One of my favorite people on earth responded with resounding agreement, but then asked the question, given that it's an election year and no one comes on TV to say anything about anything except in order to get somebody elected, how do I know what to believe, and how do I know what to think about these things? Today I want to show you how to use worldometers.com to get 3 very important numbers that you need in order to think for yourself about the coronavirus pandemic. If you Google United States coronavirus worldometers, you will see what you see on the left. If you do the same thing for Spain, you'll see what you see on the field on the right. Right away, you'll notice that the United States is only showing its closed cases, while Spain is showing active cases and closed cases. That might be a function of where you're at in your epidemic. It could be that later on you'll be able to split the data the way Spain has. The thing I want to draw your attention to first are the coronavirus cases, the total cases on both accounts. Now, as you've probably heard and have certainly figured out for yourself by now, these numbers don't reflect the actual number of cases. If you live in China, Spain, Italy, France, the United States, the United Kingdom, you need to multiply that number by about 10. There are several different mathematical processes that get epidemiologists and mathematicians to this shared assumption, but 10 is the magic number right now. So what that means is in the United States, you actually have 7 million people with coronavirus. And here in Spain, we actually have 2 million people, while we have only counted 200,000. Now, the second number I want to draw your attention to is the death count. Here in Spain, we have a death count of about 21,000 people among 200,000 confirmed cases. That is a kill rate of 10%, more than 10%. Now, we know that there are actually 2 million people walking around, so it will be a long time before we actually have an accurate kill number for this virus. In the United States, you've got 40,000 confirmed deaths. What we know for almost certain, though, is that deaths to coronavirus are being underreported. I know there are some saying that if you go to the hospital with a broken leg, that they're going to count it as a coronavirus case. The fact is, there were a lot of people dying of coronavirus before we started counting. And most epidemiologists agree that when we get to the end of this race, we will look back over our shoulder and realize many more people died of this than we had originally counted. Now, some will say that if we release the lockdown, we'll quickly reach herd immunity. And they cite anecdotal evidence like what happened recently in Chelsea near Boston. Some handful of people were tested and 32% came out having antibodies to coronavirus. There was another test I heard about in Atlanta where only 1% of the population had antibodies to coronavirus. And then in New York, 1 out of every 8 women or something like that, maybe 1 out of every 12 women who gave birth in a particular ward had coronavirus. If we use the numbers we're seeing here, that gives us an estimated 2% of the American population that has had coronavirus. If we go with 2% or 1% or 12% or 32%, we are still a long way from herd immunity. Now, if you've been watching the news, you know that here in Spain we've been in lockdown just a little bit longer than the United States has, but we've been in hard lockdown. So when I call my friends in the States and they say, I went out with my friends for Easter, or we had to run to Lowe's to pick up some tools, I know that when they say lockdown, they don't mean what I mean when I say lockdown. Here in Spain, we have been unable to leave the house except to go to the grocery store sometimes, to the pharmacy, to the hospital, or to walk the dog. And when we do that, we have to wear a mask, and only one person can ride in a car. So that might lead you to ask the question, in that kind of lockdown, how are this many people dying? How are this many people continuing to get sick? You got 5 weeks of that kind of lockdown. How is it possible? Well, even with those measures being taken and being observed, people are making each other sick at the store. Asymptomatic or low symptomatic people are going to the store at the same time as other people, and even though people have to stand 6 feet apart when they wait in line, even though only a certain number of people are allowed into the store, even though everything is sanitized inside the store and they put sanitizer on your hands, you're not allowed to enter the store without a mask, people are still getting each other sick. The people who work in essential jobs are getting one another sick. And the people who get sick go home to their families. And those people get sick 5 to 14 days later, and they make other people in the family sick 5 to 14 days later. Sometimes those people go out on the next run and they go make someone else sick. So even in the context of extreme lockdown, people are still able to make one another sick at a rate that is alarming. That might lead you to say, see, lockdown doesn't work, but that would be short-sighted. If lockdown hadn't happened, or some kind of very aggressive pressure to keep people from interacting with one another, cases would have climbed exponentially until it reached 50% of the human population. By then, a lot of people would be dead, somewhere between 1 and 5% of all the cases. That doesn't take into account the number of people who would be dead because of overwhelmed healthcare systems. Now let's return to the death rate for a moment. Even if those numbers weren't underreported, let's say that those numbers are accurate and that there are millions of people walking around. So in Spain with coronavirus. So in Spain, 2 million people with coronavirus and 20,000 people dead. That would be a kill rate of 1%, which is 10 times as bad as the flu. In the United States, if there have only been 40,000 deaths with between 7 and 8 million people walking around with it, that would be a kill rate of 0.5%, 0.5%, which is 5 times as bad as the flu. Now, because the human species, the human population, has no immunity to this virus, we all can catch it at an incredible rate. So this has an R naught somewhere in the ballpark of 2, 2.5. And the flu doesn't. This is twice as virulent as the flu and between 5 and 10 times as deadly. That's the situation that we've got just based on the reported numbers. So we have the total number of people who have coronavirus as an important number, the number of people who have died, who have been reported dead, as an important number, and the third important number on the Worldometer site that I would draw your attention to are the number of serious or critically ill cases. Now, eventually, I hope the United States Worldometer site will show that information. It might show it in the state-by-state chart, but right here on the Spain chart, you can see that we have 7,371 right now critically ill. So of the active cases, that's about 7% are critically ill. Why is this number important? A country or state or city's healthcare system is like that community's immune system. When that healthcare system gets overwhelmed by a particular illness or a particular catastrophe, it loses its ability to allocate resources to other things. Now, this particular catastrophe is also contagious. So every time someone takes a bed with COVID, they take a lot more resources from that healthcare system in the long run than somebody with a non-communicable disease would. So you can see why the critically ill or seriously ill number informs the death number. Every seriously ill person occupies a bed. Every critically ill person takes oxygen or possibly intubation. Every critically or seriously ill person is constantly in contact with healthcare workers, increasing the frequency with which those healthcare workers get sick and pass the illness to other patients or just can't do their job. So every time someone is in the hospital with COVID, they very significantly undermine the healthcare system's ability to protect that community, not only from COVID, but from the ramifications or consequences of other illnesses or kinetic accidents. If your uncle has a heart attack or your brother has an accident at work, people go to the hospital with severe or serious injuries or health crises that are unrelated to COVID. And if that hospital has been overrun or badly taxed by COVID, they will not receive the same degree or quality of care that they would have received if that hospital had been able to manage its COVID cases. A lot of the cases that we're seeing, a lot of these numbers are in urban settings. Rural settings will see the same kinds of dynamics later and more slowly. But when they do, it could be more catastrophic for those communities because those communities don't have healthcare systems, hospitals, of the same caliber or with the same kind of manpower or equipment that a larger cities would have. All right, so case count, death count, and the number of people who are in the hospital. Be wise, don't oversimplify, and try hard not to believe anything a politician says, especially if they're angry.